So I'm doing that part. And now some people can see us, but we have to go live over here on our Rockfin page in order to have all the streams going. I think it'll take a minute to catch up. There, now it'll let me. And I can click there so that we are live. And then now we are all set. And that's how we start these awkwardly. But hey, Rania.
Hey, Kevin.
We're doing a live show. We found the time. We found it in our busy journalism schedules. And we're here to talk with people who are patrons and subscribers of the show, but also check in with people who are not if they're stopping by. So I know that you are in Lebanon in the middle of a crisis, and you just told me you've got camping lanterns so that we can.
Oh yeah, I have no electricity right now, so I have one. Well, I have one camping lantern, and then I have one like battery operated ring light that you like plug into a battery pack. So that's why it looks. I actually had somebody ask me, and I have like an extra battery for my router. I had somebody ask me in a comment on a YouTube video recently. They're like, how do you have power? And I'm like, oh, I don't. It just looks like I do. No, Lebanon it's such a horrible situation here right now. I mean, no, I don't know anybody with 24-hour electricity. Like even rich people don't have 24-hour electricity because you can't find fuel for the generator. The state electricity grid has gone almost entirely offline. I mean, I think that there was like 1 hour of state electricity yesterday. I haven't had any state electricity today. And even for those of us with lucky enough to have like private building generators, we can't find fuel to keep them going for longer than just a portion of the day. So yeah, Lebanon is being squeezed right now. Lebanese elites are like dragging their feet and doing nothing about it. And it's really bizarre because it's like this could be so easily fixed. Lebanon just needs oil from somewhere. We're in a region full of countries that could offer oil and they haven't. Iraq has, but the government's dragging its feet. Iran and also Iraqi oil. There is an Iraqi oil deal, but it's not the kind of oil Lebanon needs. So it has to go through a refinement process, which is why the government's dragging its feet, because there's like a non-functioning government in Lebanon that's unable to hand it like what they call tenders, to hand out the tenders for that. So the contractual stuff for the refinement process is taking so long, while Iranian oil is already refined how Lebanon needs it and could be used right now if we had it. But the Lebanese government was told by the Americans, if you accept even 1 liter of Iranian fuel, we will sanction your last. Lebanon has one financial institution that's still that still allows it to carry out financial transactions internationally. That's a part of the SWIFT banking system. I don't know if anybody knows what that means, but basically that allows it to carry out international financial interactions and do business internationally, right? It's one lifeline, is this one last financial institution that's connected to Western financial institutions. And the U.S. threatened to shut that down if Lebanon accepts even 1 liter of Iranian fuel. So Lebanon as a government can't. Hezbollah, it's gotten so out of hand, the fuel crisis. I mean, there's hospitals that are hospitals can't go an hour without electricity. They have people on machines that need it. And they are on backup. They are on generators and backup generators all day, but they can't find fuel. So Lebanon is to that point where hospitals are like saying people are going to die because their ventilators will shut down if we don't have electricity. We can't find fuel. Furthermore, our doctors and nurses can't find fuel to put in their cars to get to work. Or they're waiting in lines for 6 hours and can't get to work. So this is becoming a humongous crisis that's just snowballing. Water pumping stations need fuel to function. They're out. Their generators don't have fuel. There's no state electricity. Lebanon's about to face a huge water shortage that's totally man-made. But we can't accept Iranian oil. I mean, it's completely absurd.
So how do you work? How does anybody do anything?
They don't. I figured out ways to get around things for now. We have scheduled cuts in my building throughout the day. So I schedule interviews right now. I mean, I can do this because we're going to go for about an hour. So I know that
Yeah.
my computer can last, and I have a battery backup that keeps my router going. So the router doesn't shut down. And then, I have like a webcam that's very light sensitive. So I don't need that much light. So like I said, like I have these 2 battery operated lights that are enough. So that's how I'm doing my job right now. I mean, sometimes a lot of the day I still do have electricity. I'm really lucky. I don't know how long that's going to last. So I can use like my nicer equipment for my interviews that I do for my program dispatches. So far it's still working. I don't know how much longer it's going to work though. Like there may come a point where I just can't work from here anymore and I'll have to leave. And I mean, that's what's happening for a lot of people. And for those who get stuck staying, I mean, they're spending the average person in Lebanon right now is spending the vast majority of their day with 0 electricity and scorching heat. I mean, people are not sleeping. You walk in the streets here and people just look miserable and tired. And it's like there's like a social explosion just boiling, like right underneath the surface. And if somebody lights and I mean, not in a good way, not like, revolutionary explosion. I mean, like violent anger towards each other because you're frustrated and tired and hot and hungry and don't have water. Like that's where Lebanon is headed. And the international community is just like sitting on its hands. And, the Lebanese government's corrupt and to blame. Lebanon doesn't have a government. And the people who are obstructing a government formation are the West's allies. So it's just like, I don't know like what, it's a really messed up situation. It doesn't have to be this way. I'm not saying that the Lebanese elite are blameless. They are absolutely to blame, but many of them are puppets of the West. And as far as I've seen, these Western countries have done nothing to tell their puppets and clients in this country to stop standing in the way. They're just like, whatever. They're happy to let Lebanon sink.
Yeah. And isn't there was the anniversary of the explosion, right? Like a few weeks ago. And am I correct that most people still have been given no accountability or any information on what went on to lead to that event, right?
Of course not, because the entire system here is implicated. The entire system of like criminal negligence and ineptitude and profit making and, also shady things that were happening behind the scenes. Like I've heard from a few people now, and I mean, I can just only say this is speculation. I can't prove it. But, the people in charge of parts of the port, like the port of Lebanon has been used to smuggle weapons for rebels in Syria before by the Future Movement, which is the Saudi like puppet, US puppet, political party in this country. One of them. And, there are questions being asked, not publicly, but about where, like all this ammonium nitrate that exploded, there was a huge portion of it that went missing and no one knows where it went. One of the plausible scenarios is that the Future Movement, who has appointed people who run parts of the port, smuggled it to Syria to be used by rebels. We know non-state actors use ammonium nitrate. There's been attempts to try to say the Syrian government got it from Hezbollah, but Hezbollah doesn't control the port. And Hezbollah also, like the Syrian government is a government. It's backed by the Russians and the Iranians. It doesn't need to use ammonium nitrate for explosives. It has access to conventional weapons. Whereas non-state actors like Al-Qaeda and ISIS didn't necessarily have that kind of access. So they actually use this to build explosives. But of course, no one's looked into that story, at least not in like Western circles, because it doesn't go with their narrative of like Hezbollah's ruining the country and Hezbollah is responsible for the port explosion. And also the explosion has been completely politicized, where at least in the media, it's just being used to try to say it's Hezbollah's fault, like with no actual evidentiary basis when it was everyone's fault. And no one is blameless. Like the entire Lebanese system is at fault, like I said. But no, I don't think there's going to be any accountability for this because there's no accountability for anything in Lebanon. There are banks. I mean, what's so shocking about the situation right now is the economy was destroyed by the banks, by the governor of the central bank and all his banking cronies attached to pro-Western political parties, allies of the West. And, I just met with somebody a few days ago who lives in Switzerland now and was telling me, because he like kind of travels in elite circles, And one of the heads of one of the main banks in Lebanon was in Switzerland, and that's where all the money went. Like all of these banks that they stole depositors' money in Lebanon. People here are suffering while all these banking elite are in Europe and are in Switzerland, like buying villas and buying penthouses and buying cars and using all that depositors' money that they enrich themselves with abroad with zero repercussions for the destruction of an entire country and its economy. And it's shocking that no one in Lebanon is talking about it because the entire media apparatus here is owned by oligarchs attached to these banking elites. No one's talking about the banks. Like no one. It's amazing to me. Anyways, I won't go on talking about Lebanon. It's now you've just unleashed my frustration from like the daily stuff that I have to deal with. And Kevin, I'm like a lucky person here. I'm a privileged person here. I'm privileged to have only 8 hours of electricity cuts as of now. 8 hours, a third of my day, I do not have electricity, and I'm privileged in Lebanon.
Though I feel like it flies under the radar mostly. People who are attuned to the effects of U.S. imperialism are looking to Latin America, and they're looking to certain particular Middle East countries. But I do feel like Lebanon gets missed as something that has ongoing U.S. policy and implications for the people of Lebanon. Like people failing to make that connection between what the U.S. government is doing and what is happening on the ground in Lebanon. That there's a connection. Because like you said this before.
The media isn't telling them. Like the media is just saying Lebanon it has a collapsing economy because of this super corrupt elite that stole money. It's like, oh, that's really sad. Like another third world country with like a collapsing economy. Look at these poor brown people, whatever. Oh, Lebanon used to be the Paris of the Middle East, and now look at it. But no, like your country played a role in destroying Lebanon. And I mean, I just, it's a little bit more complex in Lebanon. It's not as straightforward as like Syria or Venezuela or Cuba, but the effects are the same. And, now that I'm actually like experiencing it firsthand, and again, in a privileged position, I'm experiencing it. So there's people who are like, at least I'm sleeping at night, right? Like I can sleep at night. I have AC at night for now. The second that ends, I'm sure I'm going to have rings around my eyes and I'm going to be even more frustrated than I am right now. But like, I understand to some degree what these policies are doing to Cuba, what these policies are doing to Syria, what these policies are doing to Venezuela, what these policies are doing to every country, Iran, every country that, the U.S. imposes mass suffering on because it just can't get its way. I mean, that's what ultimately this comes down to, is the U.S. didn't get its way. And as a result, it's punishing the entire country.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good way to move, a lot of what you raise, we can move over laterally to Afghanistan, which is on everyone's mind currently as we do the live broadcast. I don't think we could really do the show without reflecting on some of what we've been seeing the last few days. And I know you're going to talk about all of this and where things are at when you do your Breakthrough News Live show for this week, which everyone should tune into. But you talk about the people who are fleeing with wealth. It's like we see the leaders or the elites in Afghanistan who were enriched by the U.S. military occupation or having support from the United States. They fled, they left their country. They're not going to stay there and work with the Taliban in order to run Afghanistan after U.S. military forces are gone and they're no longer on the dole. They can't get the millions upon millions of dollars that had been flushing their cash reserves and everything. So they're gone. I think that's why they're gone, is because they don't know where they're going to be enriched anymore with this new reality of the Taliban running Afghanistan. But then another concern, I watched an excellent, I got to say, maybe there are some things that I could quibble with, but the Code Pink webinar that was put together with Ann Wright and Matthew Ho yesterday was excellent, and people should go watch it as like a continuation of our conversation that we did when we covered Afghanistan back in July. There were things that are still relevant from that conversation. I shared a few clips.
Oh, totally.
On unauthorized disclosure account, including just contextualizing the retaliation of like people freaking out that the Taliban executes government forces. But Anne Wright pointed out that back in 2001, there was that convoy of death where the shipping containers were taken out to the desert, and Dostum, who was the first vice president of Afghanistan at one point, with the full support of the U.S., a warlord, executed up to 2,000 Taliban prisoners in the middle of the desert by opening fire on those shipping containers. And so that's just something to contextualize. But Anne Wright made a really good point, which is, now, if there's anything that anyone can do who is concerned about the current state of affairs with Afghanistan, we need to pressure the Biden administration not to turn towards sanctions as a way to get the Taliban to, I don't know, for lack of a better word, I'm going to use Western jargon, act civilized as a government, but we know, I think in the back of our minds, that because it's how they respond to Iran, Lebanon, and other places, that in order to try and force some kind of human rights policy, they're likely to sanction the Taliban as a way to deal with what is happening now.
I mean, I think it depends. The U.S. doesn't sanction anyone unless they get in the way of U.S. interests. So True. It hasn't, the Taliban has yet to demonstrate whether it's going to get in the way of U.S. interests. I don't think the U.S. really cares that much about Afghanistan. That's why it left, because it no longer had a strategic purpose for it. Biden even said in his speech when he initially announced the U.S. withdrawal a few months ago, he specifically cited that the U.S. needs to get out of Afghanistan so it can focus on what's important, like its war with China. So in a way, getting out of Afghanistan for the U.S. was inevitable because it lost its strategic value in so many ways. That said, I think it's also, important to note that the Taliban it's wrong to say that the Taliban necessarily defeated the U.S. because what happened is the U.S. under Donald Trump and Zalmay Khalilzad and, they handed the country over to the Taliban. They made this peace deal that threw their allies under the bus, their Afghan government that the U.S. spent 2 decades propping up, which we saw just fell like a house of cards as soon as the U.S. left.
House of cards.
Literal house of cards, though. At the same time, I don't like this framing of Biden's either, where in the speech last night, he said that the Afghan, something along the lines of, I don't have it in front of me, but that the U.S. can't fight a war that the Afghans themselves aren't even willing to fight. I mean, that's just unfair and offensive because actually for the last 20 years, the Afghan government forces that the U.S. was equipping and training died in the tens of thousands fighting America's war on the Taliban and war on terror and whatever the war was of terror, whatever the war was in Afghanistan, no one's quite sure that the U.S. was fighting. They died in the tens of thousands. They sacrificed a lot of lives, a lot of Afghan lives were sacrificed, especially the last couple of years when the U.S. was basically like, we'll stop hitting you, Taliban, just don't hit American soldiers. And so you didn't see American soldiers die for a couple of years. Afghan soldiers were still dying. Afghan police were still dying.
Yeah.
And, I think that it could be as much as the U.S. built up a corrupt regime, a corrupt government, entirely corrupt institutions. They didn't really do much building in Afghanistan. They still did build these bubbles, like in Kabul and other cities that were separate from sort of the Taliban countryside and more developed and had a kind of middle class group of people who were traveling, access to the international community and world. And these are the people who are freaking out now and want to leave because they don't want to live under the Taliban, especially given, what the Taliban was like 25 years ago. But, the U.S., it could be said that had the Afghan forces put up a fight, there would have been a civil war in Afghanistan that consumed the entire country for who knows how many years. And that happened in the 90s. That happened. There was a civil war that consumed tens of thousands of lives, again, after a fire that the U.S. left burning after its policies in Afghanistan in the 80s and early 90s. And so it could also be said, and maybe this is a bit of a controversial take, but rather than Joe Biden's assessment of like, well, the Afghans weren't willing to fight for their own country, so why should we? It could also be said, well, okay, you don't know how to build anything, which is why they so easily collapsed, but also they avoided a lot of bloodshed. I mean, somebody made a joke that the transition in Afghanistan was more peaceful than the U.S. presidential transition this past January. And I mean, this is not to say like that people should fear the Taliban. It's a terrifying organization. I wouldn't want to live under them, especially as a woman, a minority woman. But so far, it's been quite bloodless, especially the takeover of Kabul. It's yet to be seen what it will look like in the coming days, weeks, months, and years. But that's certainly not the Taliban of 25 years ago. It's not even the same generation. The Taliban of 25 years ago, most of them are dead. This is a younger generation. I mean, the ideology is horrible. Afghanistan, I wouldn't want to live there. But there seems to be more of an understanding, at least among their leadership in Doha, that gets that, like, if you don't want to be isolated by the international community, if you want your neighbors to work with you, if you want access to international aid, you can't behave like you did 25 years ago. We'll see what happens. I'm upset about the turn of events. People got a little bit mad at me because they were like, well, that's not a leftist take. But I was very upset with the way the U.S. withdrew. I don't think that it's right to just get out of a country the way the U.S. did after spending 20 years pretending to nation build. I don't think the U.S. should have stayed, but the deal the U.S. made to get out threw the country under the bus. And it's like a testament to the Afghans that there isn't a civil war right now, when the U.S. literally did everything in its power almost to ensure there would be.
Yeah. And, I'm going to go back to something that I heard from the Code Pink webinar, but that's just because I think while it's important to focus on all the people who have lied to us about Afghanistan, and something I've been saying is that, obviously there are all these like delusions and lies that we were adopting collectively as a society, like maybe not me individually, but like collectively as a nation. There are things that we were accepting about what was happening on the ground in Afghanistan that just simply were false. But those things were well known. And if we had just listened to people who have been dissenting for at least the last decade, if not longer, then I think the shock that we felt of seeing the Taliban waltz into Kabul over the last couple of days would not have been as stunning to everyone. Like, it wouldn't, I don't know if we would have had the same feeling if we had a better understanding, if we hadn't dismissed the understanding that was shared.
I'm sorry, Kevin, I'm sorry. This just popped up into my screen. Just because you were saying that. I was wrong. I admit. It looks like the U.S. has frozen Afghanistan's national reserves in American banks to prevent the Taliban from accessing them. Huh.
See, what's that? So what's that going to do for the Afghan people? How do you, I saw someone who, I'm not sure what their relationship is to Afghanistan, but they were going on about the droughts in Afghanistan that have affected people's ability to actually grow food and provide for their villages. So what are you going to do? Now, with these sanctions, how does humanitarian aid get to the people that everyone's been apoplectic on news channels for the last 24 to 48 hours? What does this do? If not make it impossible for the Taliban to take care of their people who they're now expected to govern, you know?
Well, this makes it impossible for them to govern, doesn't it? I mean,
and so are we going to just collectively starve these people? Is that the solution? Again, like, you're driving a population into the arms of the Taliban, just like we had been doing periodically, if not consistently throughout this war. I mean, those are things that, like, Matthew Ho was warning about of how, like, the insurgency seemed to be capitalizing on the fact that people didn't have faith in the government that we had handpicked or wanted to rule from Kabul. So, you see these figures who are part of the reconciliation, so to speak, that are reaching out, trying to work with the Taliban. Did you see that, like, Hamid Karzai wants to work with whoever the Taliban is going to put forward as their leadership. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar wants to work with the leadership. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I mean, these people are trying to make the country somewhat livable, and again, to avoid a civil war. Like, that's what these are also people. These are also some of the names you just mentioned. These are also figures who have been involved in past civil wars. And I think maybe have an understanding of like, that was a disaster. Let's not do that again.
But the other reason why I mentioned them is just to say that there's a part of me in the back of my head that's apprehensive, because as I'm thinking about, okay, now they're going to freeze the reserves. Okay, why are these figures who have been aligned with like the CIA and the U.S. military wanting to be part of the reconciliation if they're not going to be representing the U.S. interests of like what we want for that country? So, it's, to me, it's like, I don't think it's good that the Taliban is running Afghanistan, but I really do wish to see the people of Afghanistan deal with the presence of Taliban as their leaders themselves, of like having that moment of resistance. There are actual like Afghan revolutionaries who have wanted the opportunity to resist the Taliban without having to deal with the enemy of the United States being there as occupiers.
Right.
That's just something that we should acknowledge, that like they're, what was it Malala Joya says, like that she recognized that there were 3 different enemies, and one of them was US as an occupation. One of them was the Taliban. Another was the warlords that we have enriched, that we had allowed to continue to hold parts of Afghanistan and their territories. But with the US gone now, they just have those 2 enemies to deal with if they're seeking freedom and more human rights.
Right. I mean, I think that's the case with any country. Is the US acts as a spoiler and makes it impossible for sort of like any revolutionary or leftist momentum, for that matter, to gain any steam when there's all these contradictions inside the country fighting each other, one of which, the main part of which, is imperialism.
And there's another question I think we have to ask, which is, what was the Pentagon doing? I think you and I probably both have some idea of what was going on, but what was the Pentagon doing for the last 18 months? They knew this withdrawal was coming. And we see this image going around of like 600 Afghans crammed onto a US cargo plane. It's obscene. It's like,
no, they didn't even save the people that collaborated with them. I mean, the US didn't care. Not only did they didn't care. People, like, they just left people to die. It's incredible. It's really incredible. And I think that there is a certain weakness this shows about the US, that it couldn't even save its allies. I don't like the comparison to Saigon, because I don't think the Taliban is comparable to the North Vietnamese. I think in the case of the North Vietnamese, it was a good thing they won. But in the sense that there is a parallel, it's that it shows how America is perfectly willing to abandon its allies, to the point where like they literally light them on fire on the way out, right? And like sentence them to death practically. And I think that this is the image that is reverberating around the world, particularly for those around the world who collaborate with and partner with the United States. If I was, the Israelis or the Saudis or, the US allied factions in Ukraine or Venezuela or really any country around the world, I would see what happened in Afghanistan as a worrying sign that, oh crap, maybe the US isn't willing to stand by us when push comes to shove. I mean, of course, like every place is, on a different level of priority with what the US is willing to do for them. But at the end of the day, I can tell you, those who spend time resisting US imperialism see this as a very positive sign. They see this as demonstrating a level of US weakness. And those who are allied with the US see it as a concerning sign. And I think they should be concerned, because I think that there is something to be said here about the sort of like decline of American empire that this reflects. And I'm not saying that American empire is over or that it's necessarily weak, but it shows that it has weakened, even if slightly. Oh my God, my electricity is about to come on. I heard the generator.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes. For people who are watching, we are taking questions. If anybody has anything for us that they want us to address, or any comment you want us to respond to, now's a good time. I mean, that's why we're here live. And so obviously, if you've got anything to share, go ahead. I'm keeping an eye on it. But those images of what happened at the airport, I would like to say that I believe that that image of chaos was entirely manufactured by the United States. I believe. I mean, and I'll make my case. As I was listening to the Code Pink webinar and listening to, again, I'm going back to people who have experience in Afghanistan that were talking, it was pointed out that the Taliban had actually taken control of the commercial side of the airport, almost like around the same time that there were thousands of people that were crawling all over this U.S. military cargo plane. So the U.S. was talking to people who were part of the Taliban. They were planning their exit. They were letting people in the Taliban know what they're doing. They were telling them about their plans to get diplomats and other officials out of the country. And all these people that descended on this U.S. military cargo plane, it seems again like it just feels like we allowed that to happen because we wanted that to be the video that was broadcast to the world. And
why? I don't quite understand the logic there.
Because those are people who are all supposedly afraid of the Taliban, and they're doing anything they can to get on to a U.S. military cargo plane. So, I mean, why
would the U.S. want that image broadcast around the world? That's what I don't quite follow.
I don't know, because I think they want to make it seem like things were more out of control than they really are on the ground. Like, I think so far the last 24 to 48 hours, what I've seen in most of the broadcasts is that people want to create this scene that makes it seem like it isn't stable. But like, for the most part, the Taliban are there and they want to negotiate with people. You're seeing things of like giving government officials amnesty. I don't know how that's going to be worked out, but like to avoid civil war, like what you were saying. And so then all this panic takes place at the Kabul airport, and the U.S. controls that part. And they could have kept these hundreds of people from climbing all over these airplanes and kept them back. And it's like, I feel as someone following this that those people were allowed there because there was some kind of, I mean, yes, I hear what you're saying, that you don't feel how this is beneficial to the Biden administration, but it would suggest what they want to project to the world, which is that now all of Afghanistan is panicked over the Taliban running the country. But that's not inaccurate. The thing is, what you're saying is plausible, but it's also like, I think you're giving the U.S. government a little too much credit. And the reason I say that is because their assessments for how quickly the Taliban would take over the country were way off. I mean, this was a huge failure of U.S. intelligence. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. They don't know what the hell is happening on the ground, not in Afghanistan, not in Iraq, not in Syria. They don't know. Like, they were like, their assessments for how quickly the Taliban would take over was like, first it was like a few months. Then they were like, okay, 30 days, we're going to like an emergency mode to evacuate all of our staff and all of our people from the embassy. And then it happened in 72 hours. And I think it actually was a level of like them just getting the hell out as quickly as they could and not really prioritizing or caring that they couldn't get some Afghan nationals out, because, the U.S. doesn't care about people who aren't American. They just don't, especially when it comes to being abroad. The priority is to get anybody with an American passport out, and that's all that matters. And it looks like that's what they were doing. So I think I mean, you could be right. I'm not, as far as theatrics go. Well, I'm not saying it was manufactured, but it just does seem like these people shouldn't have been able to get where they were if that area was still under
Well,
control.
they shot like people were climbing over the wall to the airport. Like
Uh-huh.
I'm sure you saw those images. I mean, they shot people. They shot like 5 or 7 people, I think, were shot amidst that chaos by American soldiers. But I mean, you could totally be right. But at the same time, like, I don't even think the US needs that image because Afghans are, especially in Kabul, especially anybody who worked with anything affiliated with the US government, are absolutely terrified for their lives right now. I mean, I'm talking to people all day, hearing from people trying to get their brother out, trying to get their sister out, trying to get their,
Yeah.
this family member out, trying to, secure a visa here or there because nobody expected this to happen this fast. People weren't planning for, oh shit, I need to get out of here in 2 days. And what's even worse is it's like impossible to get a visa. Impossible. All of these countries that spent 20 years destroying Afghanistan and setting the stage for this aren't giving out visas. Like it's like a very, very limited amount. So you have to know someone. And it's horrible. Like I'm literally hearing from, and there's rumors flying around Afghanistan. There's rumors, oh, this guy who worked for the government, the Taliban showed up at his house and took him outside and executed him. I don't know if it actually happened, but I'm really scared. Another person I know said, oh, they came to my house today asking if I had any weapons. I was really scared. And then I didn't, and they left, but like, I'm really terrified. Like people are really scared. I mean, it's certainly calmer than they expected. Like, I think they expected a lot more bullets flying. But given the history of this group and given the history of what they did in the 90s when they took over, people are rightfully terrified, and so terrified to the point where they psychotically jumped on. There's people who jumped onto the back of a plane taking off. Like, there's no other way for that to end except for in your death. Like once a plane takes off and you're holding on to it, like that plane can't land with you safely, like being attached to it. Like even if they wanted to suddenly land, they can't. You're going to die if you do that. So that's like a really desperate, and it might, you have to like be either crazy or super desperate. That's like a suicide mission. So anyway, I mean that terror is real and does exist.
Oh yeah, it definitely does.
That said, like there certainly is, of course, by the American media and elements in the American government who were adamantly opposed to leaving Afghanistan. Like we know all the generals wanted to stay. There's certainly those people who want to portray as much chaos as possible as like, oh, I'm vindicated. See, I told you this is what was going to happen. Yeah.
And that's what I'm responding to, because like there's a lot that I see that is very bothersome, because it does seem like the media wants the Taliban to start massacring people right now, because it would validate everything that they're saying, and they want so bad. See, here's the other thing. Joe Biden and his fucking speech really put me in a bind, because he did the thing that I wanted to see happen. He stood by the US withdrawal of forces. He didn't hem and haw. He started right from the top saying that like this was the choice we made, and I'm not going to give any inch to any of these neoconservatives who are my own supporters. People like Bill Kristol and Max Boot and David Frum and these other people who made common cause with me to defeat Donald Trump. There are other people we could name, but we've seen them, and they've been working overtime the last week to 2 weeks trying to say that it was wrong for the U.S. to withdraw its forces. But obviously we could have a long conversation about how there would never be a good time. I think he's right. 5 years before or 10 years from now, it was always going to be chaotic because of the fact that the U.S. empire couldn't seriously build up this nation. But then Joe Biden goes on to tell a whole bunch of lies in his speech about how he didn't support the surge, which is false. He supported Obama's surge. And he tells these lies about how it wasn't for nation building, that they were just there for a limited terrorism mission. Well, that's bullshit, because you were sending people there for reconstruction, and you were trying to stand up schools. And there are people like Ann Wright who were definitely tasked with doing things that involve building Afghanistan into a country. And so he tells all these lies, and he's blaming the Afghan people for the outcome. But yet, within it, it's a speech that rejects the continuation of a war, which puts me in like an impossible spot as somebody who was ready for this war to be over.
Right. I totally hear you that there was so much about that speech that was like infuriating. I just, it's a really conflicting position to be in again, because like, yes, the US needed to leave Afghanistan, but I think, you can't do things in a reckless way that make it worse. And the US, it's almost like they were doing everything in their power on their way out to just make it worse. I'm not saying that, and I mean, I think someone did ask a question. I took a look at the chat. Someone did ask a question like about the Taliban, I think it was. Hang on, let me take a look because I don't want to
think again. Here, I can put it on the screen. This will.
Okay. Yeah.
This is not a person's name.
So well, the question is, what is the feeling on the ground in the U.S. with regard to the politicians? Oh, okay. There was a different question I saw, but I guess it's not. I saw it in the YouTube chat, but we can answer this too. What's the feeling on the ground in the U.S. with regard to the politicians who have propped up the war in Afghanistan? Does anyone care enough to want to pull them up? I'm not in the U.S., so I'm not quite sure, but Kevin is. What do you think?
Let's see. What is the use of regard to do propped up the? Well, so what I've been seeing is that it's really bizarre. We talk about political tribalism all the time, right, Rania? And it's like Biden, a Democratic president, is making this decision that I actually think people in the Democratic Party don't really want to be on board with, but they also can't really dissent against their president. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, like I think, they're in a tough spot. You got to feel for those MSNBC people, right?
Yeah, like I think, and I noted this when I had been following CNN's coverage for the last month, where they would invite on these like generals who really should be banned from our TV screens, but they continue to like hustle and sell war. And they were talking about, you kept hearing very innocently, well, we should just send 2,000, 3,000 US troops back into Afghanistan. We should just like that wouldn't, provoke some kind of event that would lead to a continuation of the war. I mean, because I think it absolutely would. But I believe that, you've seen Republicans who have been really pro Afghanistan war almost become, I mean, not that they have to be coherent. They typically are all over the place, but they don't really know what to do because it was Trump who negotiated this deal with the Taliban. So what are they supposed to say? Because all of these people who they let 5,000 Taliban prisoners go free in that agreement that was negotiated with the Taliban. So they can't really say that Biden's, letting the Taliban have a victory. Well, you negotiated a deal with through the Trump administration that gave Taliban the country. So I don't know. As far as I can tell, there is nothing coherent coming from U.S. politicians who have supported the war. I don't think they really know what to say. In fact, if you want to laugh, as we were leading into the speech from Joe Biden, I tuned into it. Jake Tapper invited not anyone who had dissented against the war, not Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, who told us everything he had seen on the ground 10 years ago, not anybody affiliated with the Afghanistan papers that told us anything the establishment should have known about what was happening with the Afghanistan war. We got nobody who has any background in challenging the Afghanistan war. We get Senator Joni Ernst from the Midwest Plains states in the U.S., and her message before Joe Biden's speech was, I hope he thanks our troops and makes them know that we haven't forgotten their contribution to this war. Because that's really what the fuck it's all about, Joni Ernst, isn't it? That we make sure that all the troops don't have their feelings hurt and that we don't forget that they were deployed there, even though we gave them all post-traumatic stress disorder and sent them back home. And they are going to be dealing this for years upon years with no help or assistance at all from the Veterans Affairs Department. But okay, yes, you're right, Joni. Let's make sure Biden names them like that has anything to do with what's happening on the ground right now in Afghanistan with the people of Afghanistan who are under threat from the Taliban. But that's where politicians' heads are, is that they just want to make sure they protect and pay lip service to the veterans in their districts, that they're concerned about alienating them. As far as like contractors go, I mean, who were profiteering off the war, I don't think there's really anything to say. I mean, but that's where politicians are. What do the veterans think? And I think that there's a tremendous disconnect here. I've seen people suggest that Joe Biden and Trump are probably more right about what Americans wanted out of this Afghanistan war than anyone in the Washington establishment, than anyone in these think tanks or on MSNBC or CNN, because they both knew that people wanted the Afghanistan war to be over, and they demonstrated that politically. Poorly, disastrously, but they executed and moved towards a goal of ending the U.S. deployment of military forces.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that assessment. There was a couple other questions. I didn't want to miss them just because we told people they could ask them, and I don't want to leave them hanging.
I applaud you for making sure that we're inclusive. Let me just, I'm going to go back up here. Because this person said, okay, that's not anybody's actual name, so I'm going to put that on screen. Don't you think, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you want to say to that, Rania, but it's really hard to say.
Well, I don't see the question.
Oh, sorry. Did I not leave it up there long enough?
No.
Here we go.
Okay, but don't you think the rapid takeover of the country by the Taliban seems a little fishy? Doesn't it seem like it was coordinated? Yes, it was coordinated because the U.S. literally negotiated a deal that handed the country over to the Taliban. That's like what happened. Like, nobody in the media talked about this. I wrote a really lengthy piece about all of this for Breakthrough like 2 months ago, for Breakthrough News. And nobody cared because nobody cared about Afghanistan until now. And I hope people go back and read it. And it's about how the U.S. lit a fire on the way out. Donald Trump came up with this very America First deal. He put this guy, Zalmay Khalilzad, in charge of the reconciliation process of Afghanistan. He's a very corrupt person who a lot of Afghans blame for this. He's both Afghan and American. And he made a deal with the Taliban that completely undermined the U.S.-backed Afghan government, which basically handed the country to the Taliban as long as they made assurances they wouldn't attack Americans. And that's exactly what happened. And what's amazing about that is the U.S. did a Taliban coup against its own puppet. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's completely illogical. But it was just a way to quickly get out of Afghanistan without worrying about anything else. Like, that's what happened. So it is in many ways coordinated. I mean, not on the ground level in the sense of like the Americans like gave the Taliban weapons, but that they knew this would be the outcome. They just didn't realize it would be the outcome so quickly. But they knew that this would be the outcome.
So as we wind down this, and we'll be concluding in the next 5 or 10 minutes. But the last thing I'll say is, like, I really am concerned though about what happens to, I think Matthew Ho says there's like 10 or 15,000, if not more, CIA forces that were in Afghanistan. I mean, we have no idea what they're going to do. We have no idea.
I imagine Afghanistan will continue to have like special operations and like all that covert shit's still going to happen. The U.S. never stops doing that.
Okay, so there was one thing I wanted to flag, and then then there was an announcement I wanted to share that I received something. But I did want to say that while this is all happening, that sense of the fact that we're living through an apocalypse has intensified, and it's not something we've talked about on the show. But I was looking at this before we went on air, and I wanted to highlight what we see in going on in Siberia with these wildfires that have been happening. I don't know if people grasp like how incredibly devastating this all is, but this summary from the Smithsonian magazine that I'll just read quickly here is that these wildfires have been surging through the taiga forest in Siberia. The region hardest hit was the Republic of Sakha in northeastern Russia, also known as Yakutia. The area had 250 fires burning across 2,210 miles of land on July 5th. And by mid-July, residents of Yakutsk, the capital Osaka, were breathing in smoke from over 300 separate wildfires, as reported by the Siberian Times. And then they go on to add that almost 10 million acres are currently burning. That's like right now in the last few days, and like right now as we do this broadcast, with one fire alone scorching an area as wide as 2.5 million acres. That's from the Wall Street Journal. And then what this means is that the fires are so intense that the smoke is blocking sunlight. And for the first time in recorded history, smoke from the fires in Siberia have drifted thousands of miles away and reached the North Pole. Obviously this goes along with what we've seen in Greece, Turkey, the US, and Canada. But these Siberian wildfires are like even more gigantic than those countries combined. So we probably can't even comprehend what is going on in Siberia right now with those wildfires. It's just
no, it's horrible. They're
staggering.
like it's not just, it's like Siberia, Greece, Algeria, Turkey, Lebanon has wildfires, Palestine, it's everywhere, California, and of course what you just referenced is even more frightening. But yeah, I mean, it's like, it's weird because it's like you look at the news and
it doesn't come on our screen.
No, it doesn't. Like, except when something really sensational happens, but like nothing's being done. Like things can be done to mitigate the impact of what's inevitable at this point, right? Like we can't reverse the carbon in the atmosphere, but we can certainly prevent more from going into the atmosphere, but there's nothing's being done to do that. Except for like really, silly gestures that don't add up to anything. And because then the reason for that is what? It's because that would challenge the entire international capitalist order.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you have to call out the culprit. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, this is where I tell you that Biden's at the same time as we see these apocalyptic fires resuming fossil fuel leases on public lands and waters. So that's
yeah. And also like a couple days after that UN report came out, that was alarming, that was very alarming about even though it was already what we knew, that like it's irreversible and the damage is done and here's what's going to happen with climate change. Literally like 2 days later, the Biden administration was calling on OPEC, the worldwide oil cartel, to produce more oil. Like, I mean, it's like the disconnect is staggering, but that's the best you're going to get from elites who are living off of and profiting off of and empowered by the system, because the only way to reverse climate change is to change our entire global economy and to basically not have capitalism. Mm-hmm. And if you're a capitalist, like the vast majority of elites who control every country around the world and every financial institution, then that is against your interest, and you will do everything in your power to make sure that that system isn't challenged, even if the world burns.
Yeah. So I read that just in case anybody sees me in a future show and it looks like I'm suffering from some kind of like anxiety disorder or whatever, and has like
in some ways
mental illness.
Some ways I kind of feel like in Lebanon right now, the decay of infrastructure that's happening is kind of like what would happen in an apocalypse. Like you wouldn't have any more fuel, and you just watch what happens when everything just like slowly, one after another, like domino effect, shuts down. So there's that. Yeah. That's pretty grim.
We moved on from Afghanistan. We have one person who's like actually asking serious questions. I don't want to push them away. Let's get this in here, and then I'll say what I have to say, and we'll end the show. So this was one final question. All we can really do is speculate, but
so let's read it. Do you think what happened in Afghanistan is America's attempt at weakening Iran by planning a Wahhabi state on its border and blocking the railway system that connects it with China? So I actually am about to post an interview I did with the excellent professor of Orientalism at the University of Tehran, Mohammad Morandi, for my program at Breakthrough News, Rania Khalek Dispatches. We had a very lengthy conversation about Iran's view of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and the Taliban takeover, and what Iranians think that means for them and for the region and for the world. So I would point you in the direction of go to the Breakthrough News YouTube page, make sure you subscribe, and within the next few hours, you will be able to watch that interview. Or you can subscribe to the podcast, Rania Calic Dispatches, and you will be able to listen to it either today or tomorrow.
Do it. You should. And so thank you for the person who was asking those really good questions, who says they're fellow Lebanese. Follow your work, Rania, and I'll be looking into this channel too. Thank you for answering my questions. Now, thank you for giving us something to talk about. We really appreciate it. So I wanted to share as we conclude that I received a journalism award, and it's called the Serena Shim Award for Uncompromised Integrity in Journalism. And I wanted to talk about it right now before some other asshole on Twitter finds it and acts like I want to hide it and I'm ashamed of winning the award, because there's nothing to be ashamed about. But if you're a pro-imperialist hack, you like to attack the few independent journalists who find support from this organization, which, in a way, it's not actually like they're asking for anything in return. This was an award for journalism that's already been produced.
Yes.
It's because of the reporting and coverage that I've done on WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's case. And that's what I shared with them when I was nominated. And so yeah, I'm, I know I talked with you about it, and you've received the award before.
I have, yeah.
I'm in an esteemed group. We could go down the list and read some of the names, but people like Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal and Jimmy Dore has received it in the past, and there are other people on the list. But yeah, I just wanted to do this and have you with me as I announced it, because they like to attack us for like somehow this would compromise us. And I don't know a whole lot about this organization, but maybe you can tell people who.
So I forget what the name. I actually forgot what the name of it is, but it would be it's the name. It's like a
their acronym is so their acronym comes out to be AIPAC, but they're not the Israel lobby, obviously.
What does it stand for again? It's like Americans for Peace or something.
Yeah, it's an anti-war committee. It's an anti-war committee, I believe.
Yeah, it's an anti-war group on the West Coast of a few older people, mostly, who are super anti-war. They were anti-U.S. intervention in Syria. Sorry, you were going to say the name of it.
Well, the figure who is involved in it is Paul Larrady, who is.
He's not the only one. He's one of many people who are on a board and just decide they are American peace activists. And they were against the war on Syria. And because they were against the war on Syria, there was this huge campaign to demonize them as being a pro-Assad lobbying group, which is absurd that you would call them a lobbying group. The award is named after Serena Shim, who was a journalist that was killed while covering the war in Syria while she was in Turkey. And she was, I think she was killed in really suspicious circumstances. And she, and so they named the award after her, a war correspondent who died in the line of duty, under very suspicious circumstances, who was uncovering some of the U.S. involvement and backing these supposedly moderate rebels. And for that reason, it's been demonized and attacked, because you're not allowed to oppose the war on Syria, no matter how nuanced you are about it. Otherwise, you're an Assadist. And just the absurdity of calling it a pro-Assad lobbying group. They're not lobbying anyone. And even if they were, they don't have the capacity to lobby anyone effectively, because there is a Syrian opposition lobby. It's one of the most powerful lobbies in the United States. It's up there. I mean, it's up there with AIPAC. You just don't hear as much about it. That's why anybody who says a word about Syria that challenges the mainstream narrative is immediately demonized and has their reputation assaulted and their livelihood attacked. and their articles retracted if they happen to appear in any mainstream outlets, or, a bunch of corrections that aren't necessary added to their articles. So anyways, I think you are very deserving of this award. Your coverage of the persecution of Julian Assange has been crucial. You've been one of the only people, I can't think of anybody else who stuck to this story as closely and as meticulously as you have over the past several years since this all started. And so you deserve to have a journalism award. If you want to attack people for getting journalism awards, I would suggest attacking the journalists who are getting awards from like weapon companies founded institutions that give out awards. So anyways, I congratulate you. I think it's awesome. I've been a recipient of this award, and I appreciate the support for independent journalism that an award like this offers, because there's very few places that are willing to actually give you anything for putting in the work to expose the crimes of empire, because that is not something that's rewarded. That's something that is punished.
Yeah, and something these Bellingcat clowns try is to suggest that you wouldn't be a journalist if you accepted this money, because the Society of Professional Journalists have some kind of like guideline on accepting these funds. And I just like to say, as someone who actually is a dues-paying member of this union, because I thought it would help me in getting into the hearings and validating my identity as a journalist so that I could cover Julian Assange. So I became a member of the Society of Professional Journalists so that I could get credentials from the UK courts. Let me just say, I think that that's a lot of bullshit, because none of this money has compromised anything that I did. In fact, actually, that's in the name of the award, uncompromised integrity. So that's why they can give me the money, because it's not going to sway me. It's not going to change anything that I do. So anybody who would suggest that something different happens now, I would say that you're full of shit. Basically, that's what I would say. So we need to wrap, but I will just add on the way out here as we both sign off that one, I saw a question about why the super chats are not enabled. Well, for one, ignore that, because we aren't really on a YouTube channel. If you would like to leave us tips, go to our Rockfin channel, Rockfin, ROKFIN.com/unauthorized disc, and leave us tips there for this. If you enjoyed this broadcast, go there. It'll be there all day. You can go donate to us that way. Don't do it through YouTube. We're not going to get your money. I promise you, we won't. So you're wasting your money if you try to do it through YouTube. And then we're going to take a break. You're going to go on vacation, take some time off, because it's very stressful, as we discussed at the beginning of this show. So yeah, it's been nice to talk to everyone. I'll let you say goodbye.
Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll be back the week after next.